Welcome to Chasing Rings Overtime. These fast break episodes are an extension of the main show, delivering quick-hitting takes, bold opinions, and analysis on the biggest stories and topics across sports. While we remain rooted in football year-round, Overtime expands our lens to cover everything happening across the sports world. We will return for a second season of full-length episodes in July as we ramp up for complete NCAA football and NFL coverage in preparation for the 2026 seasons. Until then, let's go. This is Chasing Rings Overtime. Welcome to Chasing Rings Overtime. What's up, big dude?
Hey. What's happening, Guru?
Nada. Doing okay. Back to this bipolar weather again, man. Summer yesterday, fall today. So we'll get it figured out before the actual official day of summer comes, I suppose.
Yes.
But let's hop right into this. So a couple of episodes ago, we were talking about the Brendan Sorsby situation. We're going to continue that in the latter part of this episode. But first, I want to get into an interesting development that took place at the University of Georgia men's basketball program. So Adam Wexler, who is apparently a Georgia alumnus, but he was the founder of Prize Picks, which is a fantasy sports betting outlet, recently donated $10 million specifically to the University of Georgia men's basketball program. It's the largest philanthropic commitment by a single donor in the history of Georgia athletics, according to the institution, and it's primarily for basketball, nothing else. And he is no longer the CEO of Prize Picks. He stepped down in 2024. But he basically started this company in 2015, so it's pretty much running for almost 10 years, and recently disassociated himself with him. I have a little bit of a concern with someone donating that amount of money who was ever connected to any type of sports gambling outlet, even though he no longer is associated with on a day-to-day basis. Something about that doesn't sit right with me in this era that we're living in, where, you know, all these athletes are being involved in these gambling allegations. Big dude, what are your thoughts on how college sports can continue taking money in sponsorships? Because we mentioned in that a couple of shows ago about seeing the sponsorships everywhere, from being in the stadiums, commercials, so on and so forth. How these college sports entities can continue taking money and sponsorship influences from gambling and fantasy outlets while simultaneously being this safeguard over the integrity of the sport and punishing athletes who are been known to have participated in the very thing that they're promoting. Like, what are your thoughts about this? And again, I know that this gentleman is no longer associated with that company, but it just has a little stench to it that he donated proceeds that obviously came from that company, right? So these are gambling proceeds. It would be like, you know, us taking dirty money from someplace, you know, even though it's legal, it would be akin to almost taking dirty money in relation to what the policies and rules are for sports gambling. What are your thoughts on what's happening right now with this gambling stuff?
Well, I think what happens is a lot of people focus on the NCAA as enforcement, rather than looking at them as an external stakeholder. Because I think one of the issues is, I think in almost all the different schools with their integrity, you know, even though, and we're going to get to the next thing later, you know, that with the next thing that we have, that people apparently in the next thing that we're going to discuss with Sorsby, Texas Tech and the NCAA are working together on making a statement. So my question is, why can't people make a statement on all these types of things? What is it about integrity? Everybody's trying to get NIL money, and who's going to be able to take that down? And we know that college presidents are supervising athletics now. Where is their integrity in taking it? and what is the standard. I know years ago, there were a lot of institutions, even in the on-campus arenas in college, that had, even before some of the rules changed, alcohol, especially cigarettes and anything with tobacco. And it seemed like that they pushed a lot harder against alcohol and cigarettes and tobacco than they're doing gambling. I think the issue is with all the stakeholders, and how people are kind of leading the charge against gambling. I don't think enough people are doing that consistently. People are doing really what benefits them concerning, what the outcome, including NCAA, what the outcome of gambling is and what it can be. Is it a reality of certain things? Yes, it is. But when you start talking about looking at programs and looking at integrity and looking at losing scholarships and all those other types of things, the door is open. But if this is where you want to come in and close the door, don't do it by yourself. Work with the other stakeholders the same way as some of these other conference commissioners and college presidents do. They work, they have meetings. It just seemed like with alcohol and drugs, and they took a lot of those ads and things down, and they let it campaign. What is going to be the campaign that's going to be for gambling? And I know some people, when it has to do with in the beginning of eligibility meetings with athletes, it's got to be more than just doing it in a perfunctory way for the sake of doing it. It's got to have some real meaning with some real stakeholders that are trying to deal with what is integrous, that has to do with an NIL, because I think that's the biggest question, and it's out of everybody's hands for the most part. But what kind of standard can be set, and what program can set an example with a good, strong NIL that's not going to make people question the integrity of the game? Games.
I just think it's weird that the NCAA tries to actively avoid being affiliated with these sports book sponsorships, but yet sanctioned activities and events are explicitly linked to them in terms of these sponsorships. And I think you nailed it. External stakeholders. They cannot view themselves as an external stakeholder, but then also police the sport. You can't separate that. It's like, I'm a parent and these are my kids, but I'm not totally responsible for. You're responsible for these kids until they become adults. The NCAA is on something that I can't quite figure out. And I don't know why, and you mentioned this as well. No one is speaking up about the association of these outlets with sports. And, you can't separate March Madness, the event, from the commercial that comes on at the commercial break. Immediately it could be a 20-second timeout and it's a DraftKings spot, right? But don't gamble. Again, advertising something to me, as we mentioned on that show, advertising something to me to consume, but you don't want me to consume it. So I guess my question to the NCAA and then to the sponsors of those events, who do you want using those apps then? Who are you trying to entice to gamble, right? I think you mentioned, Big Dude, 70% of male college students gamble, right? So if you're looking at the demographics of who's watching these games, who those commercials are appealing to, it's going to be college-age students. Some of them are going to be student athletes. It's March Madness. I'm a football player. I'm watching March Madness. I'm a baseball player, softball player, tennis player, gymnast. I'm watching March Madness, and you know what? Hey, looks pretty cool. Maybe I'll put a little wager on it. I think they're walking a very, very fine line in terms of being in bed with these companies. And I get it. You have to pay for things. You want to get sponsors, but there's a lot of other products that you can endorse, things that aren't necessarily linked to illegal happenings in your sport that you continue to police. You're being hypocritical on the way I'm looking at it, to be quite honest with you. I mean, do you think anybody's even have any conscious decisions about how it looks? Because I think the NCAA will definitely be accused of worrying about its image, but only to an extent. If it doesn't involve making money, we're worried about it. But if we can get paid off of it, it's just like the likeness with athletes, right? Before Ed O'Bannon sued, hey, they were fine with signing a contract with Sega Genesis. Yeah, you could use our athletes' likenesses. As long as they can get the money, it's good. But when the athletes start getting a piece of the pie, which is where we are now, larger conversation later, it's not good. Now we want to control it a little bit, right? Where can we even go from this? Because this just has hypocrisy written all over it.
Yeah. And it's hard to say because, everyone has kind of given into trying to compete for the best athletes. And you have to look at where your integrity is and what line do you draw. Now, from what we read in some of these cases now, like I said, the conference commissioners and all the rest of those folks, they are the folks that are insistent upon certain things. And I think we talked last time about coaches in a certain conference because people are just so hell-bent on not getting something more than somebody else that they will go ahead and put themselves in a very vulnerable position. And the position really is, is it worth getting another athlete or putting a picture of what you have to on your field? There should be at least some more guidance as to who you're bringing in. Now, if people are bringing in $20 million a year, and you have your own thing going on, and student athletes have their own company, that'll be the next thing. Some of the student athletes that have their own business, I think you'll start to see some of these things emerge as the people who are in charge of things. Now, we start to talk about in some of these states where marijuana is legal, some of these people may have some of those smoke shops as a business and other things that are there. But then, what happens when you're saying that, for example, in states that we lived in, marijuana is legal. So is it really a lack of integrity or we just don't want to represent that? To me, there's just so many things that are twisted up about what people call things. And I think that it has to be less of a thing about what we're going to sit to enforce as to what we're going to do as a matter of beyond also onboarding. How much can the student athletes and the athletic directors, how much can they be involved with taking things beyond the first year? Because some of these student athletes, they're in the transfer portal. So they're going to all these different environments and there's nothing that's really sticking. So therefore, we leave it to the people who are running the institution, the president, the people who are running athletics, and also the leadership of the team. And of course, now you have a lot more employees that are involved with football, the general manager. I think having somebody as a general manager, that role will need to be looked at differently as well to find out, not just bringing in and managing rosters. I don't think that that's really enough. This is an example of that. Maybe they shouldn't be involved with the money aspect of it, but trying to draw up what is it that they accept and what type of program are they going to have that's going to face these different temptations.
Yeah, I think going back a little bit more to the gambling specifics of it, I've had friends who have worked in college athletics, and I know I would get so frustrated when March Madness would come around and trying to run an office pool, and they're like, "Oh, we can't do it working in the athletic department." And when I think about where sports gambling is now and all of these restrictions that have been put on, anyone adjacent to it, certainly the athletes in any type of involvement where there might be wagering involved, right? To where we are now. I don't quite get how they're going to continue to straddle this line, because once sports gambling became illegalized, and I know you referenced alcohol and tobacco earlier, and we know how prohibition was, but once those things became legal, I mean, all bets off. So I don't understand. I only kind of see this getting worse as these sites and these companies, the proliferation of the number of companies starts to expand. Their association with sports starts to expand. So, for example, these DraftKings and FanDuel, you have professional athletes in some of these ads, right? They're not supposed to gamble either on sports,
Mhm.
but yet some of them are associated with these
Yeah.
ads. They use a lot of former players, but there's a few current players that are in some of these ads. And I feel like it's only a matter of time before college athletes, especially because this amateur status is kind of up in the air right now. Now that we're paying them,
Yeah.
can I pay you to be in the DraftKings commercial? Can you get a NIL agreement that maybe DraftKings or FanDuel is linked to? I feel like something has to give here in terms of what's going to be allowed and what's not. And I'm not by any means advocating that athletes should be able to gamble. I think there should be some restrictions there, but when it's being pushed in our faces so much and it is linked to the sport that they're participating in, they may have to really look at what those guidelines look like. And this will lead us into the next segment here with Brendan Sorsby. Is the punishment perhaps too extreme because of the hypocrisy associated with it? It's one thing to be punished because you can say, hey, you're not allowed to gamble. I get that. I'm with that. But if they so happen to gamble with one of your external partners that you're making money off of, why is the penalty so extreme for something that you're kind of pushing and promoting? So going into this Brendan Sorsby thing a little bit more, we had mentioned when we talked about this last time that, he gave his excuse as, it helped him kind of remain engaged and connected without going off the rails while he wasn't playing. But we started to talk about the mental health aspect of this towards the end of that last discussion. And something I want to pose to you before we wrap up today is if Brendan Sorsby's team, his legal team, is able to successfully frame this gambling addiction as a mental health issue and win this case, could this reshape how punishment is being dealt out moving forward when it comes to sports gambling and specifically talking about college sports? So if they're successful in this case, are we going to see a lot of people go to, well, it's my mental health, I have an addiction. I didn't realize, even though we're very clear that you're not supposed to gamble on college athletics, do you think that this is going to be the fallback for people moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that almost makes a lot of sense. If they win, and I think this is where when we start talking about and keep using the word enforcement is such a strong word because it says that you're going to be punished because of and you're going to receive sanctions because of something that we have investigated and you have done, not what is presumed to have been done. Because in this particular situation, we already know because Sorsby has spoken out about what else he's done. So there's a part of it where you understand and you say that something should happen. But if you start talking about again that these things are going to happen before you get to really find out what the crux of everything is, and even, let's just say you deal with the behavior first. You may deal with the behavior first, but something's got to happen after something comes across the president of NCAA's desk to look at just the depth of where he goes. Does that have anything to do? Are there factors that lessen the pain when it comes to a sanction? I think when mental health is involved, you almost have to look at it that way. Maybe initially something happens, but I think once you go through the processes, things that lessen the pain, like mental health, it needs to be considered, because if it's not, then it goes back to what can also happen on college campuses. They had years ago that Dear Colleague letter where you didn't want to discriminate against anybody that had a disability. And then you got the American Disabilities Act. See, the NCAA has got to look at the enforcement being clear and clean, because if not, what else are you going against nationally? The ADA Act is a really big thing where I think in this situation, they could be facing violating that particular thing that has to do with Sorsby. taking what he said, maybe Sorsby goes in and then maybe you say to him, you know what, son, if you want to go to school, you can play, maybe not for the first half of the season. You got 12 games, maybe you get a 6-game suspension. I would say whatever happens in this, even if his legal team wins and he plays, I think the NCAA will still try to weigh in. But I think if they're successful and he's able to play from day one, the NCAA is going to have to really look at what they do, not just from a standpoint of enforcement and law, but what's the policy? The policy needs to be taken another look at because of mental health and other things. Are you saying that because he has mental health concerns and he's been diagnosed that he should be given things that lessens the pain? Or will you say is the NCAA extenuating circumstances such as that could lessen the pain
If
as the enforcement?
If we take out one element of this story, him betting on Indiana's games while he was on the team, even though he never bet against them, okay? But let's say you take out the Indiana bets. Do you think that this case is as extreme? And you started touching on it, and actually you touched on it. Should maybe there be levels to this punishment? And the reason I pose that is because, again, there's too close of a connection to gambling to sports right now. It's just too close, and especially to college sports. So I hate to surrender, for a lack of a better term, but I would have to say that college athletes are probably going to bet on sports. That's the culture and environment that we're living in right now. Mm-hmm. So perhaps we need to look at what those punishments look like. Is there some more severe punishment if for some dumb reason you bet on the team that you're on? Is there a punishment if you bet on the sport that you're playing? Is there another punishment just for betting in general? Do you think there should be levels to this? And would your stance on Sorsby's case change if Indiana wasn't a part of the equation or, the team that he was playing on?
Yeah, well, and I think that as time goes on, when you look at what happens in your freshman year, a lot of times you don't know you had a mental health disorder until you happen to go, your junior year. All this time that happens with just mental health. It happens with individuals that have learning disabilities. Sometimes people go a whole time in colleges and universities all the way through grad school without knowing that they have certain problems because they've never gone to counseling and they've never had anyone else that, have told them that there could be some issues, especially with gambling. But the word I was looking for and I couldn't come up with, but the mitigating circumstances, I think, occur when you start to take a look at, especially if this situation where Sorsby is beyond the worried well situation. Because I think what you're looking at with mental health, the worried well, you're looking at other people that need to see a counselor maybe 3 more times than they should be seeing him. Then when you get to the psychiatrist, since he's checked in a center, it may work backwards. But if you're way beyond something that is worried well and you just gamble a lot, there are just so many examples that he was able to self-disclose. I think that is very hard to ignore. And I don't think that you can come up with just a puzzle that fits in some pieces that fit in the puzzle for that. I think the extenuating circumstances and the mitigating circumstances, I think will allow for them to find out what's happening. Now, what I wouldn't do if I were his attorneys, again, as good as they're doing with all this, I'm not so sure that I would even put out there, even with the public, or I would advise him not to mention the supplemental draft, because to me, the supplemental draft, it kind of muddies the water in terms of what else he's trying to do, because it all talks about what his motives are for wanting to say that. And then if you bring it all the way back to Indiana, okay, I'm caught, so I got to go ahead and do this, and I got to play. And if I can't go back to the herd, then I got to go do something. So I would take the supplemental draft off the table and advise him of that, because right now it's really whether he should be coming back, irrespective of what his motivation could be. If he has a legitimate mental health issue, should he be going back to Texas Tech and being able to compete as a football player? That's
and that supplemental draft piece too, for them to throw that in there, he's almost conceding that he did something wrong, in my opinion. He's not giving up on his eligibility.
I didn't take it further. You finished.
Yeah, I'm cooked. So how about I, how can I get eligible for the draft?
Yeah, you caught the Uber on that one. You caught
the reason I posed that last question to you is because we don't know the full gamut of everything he was betting on, but these are some examples of the stuff that this guy was betting on. And don't I know you're gonna laugh, big dude. Nathan's famous hot dog eating contest, which is coming up. Okay. Turkish basketball and Romanian soccer. And then he was betting MLB, UFC, tennis. Okay. So he's not just this guy who's betting on college football games. It doesn't seem like he was trying to fix anything or use insider information or anything like that. He's a guy that truly gambles, and sounds like he likes to gamble, because as much as I like to dabble, I'm not betting on stuff like that. that he may have a problem if he's betting on those types of events, and that's why I asked you about the different levels. I mean, if you're not betting on your sport or compromising your sport, and maybe that's the best term. If you're not compromising your sport and you have this addiction and we're saying that you shouldn't be gambling, okay, that should be a different type of slap on the wrist. Now, you start compromising the sport, that's a whole different thing. And I can get behind being banned from the sport if you're found culpable of doing that. But if you're not compromising your sport, because, it is legal to gamble. I keep harping back to that. You are allowed to gamble. And, as a citizen, if you want to go bet on UFC, whether I'm a college athlete or not, because other college students can bet on UFC, then why can't you bet on it? So that'd be my only thing there. One last question for you, big dude, before we hop off. So what's more dangerous for the long-term future? And I was going to say college football, but let's say of big-time sports in general, reinstating Sorsby and softening enforcement. Okay, so bringing him back and kind of giving him a slap on the wrist, or denying him his eligibility, and actually maybe fueling more lawsuits against the NCAA. So do you think it's more dangerous to bring him back, give him a few game suspension, or just be hardcore like, nope, you're done? Go to the supplemental draft if you can.
Well, I don't think he's helped himself with the supplemental draft, but if we take that off the table, I think, he has a right to want to be, and I say as a student athlete, certainly in the herd, but I think that there should also be some other things that happen with his on-campus stuff. If he comes back, he should probably be at a point where I would say a minimum of 3 ball games he would miss.
No, but I'm asking, what's more dangerous for sports, though? For him to be allowed to come back, or for them to be cold, nope, you're done?
I think it's going to be cold. I think it's cold, them being cold and it's not being done, because then people who have mental health concerns, the ones that actually have the legitimate ones as well, they're going to be afraid to bring that forward. And we know a lot of folks, and especially student athletes, they're better about it. They are in commercials. You hear NFL players talking about it. So I would say from a matter of safety and how deep all these things go with anxiety and depression and gambling. We don't know. I mean, people who gamble bad and maybe they get into a whole thing where they gamble with something with organized crime. We saw it happen with the NBA. So we don't know what story we're going to hear about for college. So I would say if you cut everything off, then you're not going to get anything that's cooperative. I say the way that they're trying to work together, and this, a genuine is stakeholders. Everybody knows you got enforcement, but enforcement comes also after you take a look at what it is that, that's going to bring him back. It will hurt worse if they just cut him off and they send them to the league. I mean, you want to send people that are ready, especially when you know something. People who are ready, they mature, they got a story to tell. If he's offering to help, take him up on it, because I think this is a time for the NCAA to look good, because people who look back at this 15, 20 years later, why they didn't help this individual that had hours out of it. That's why people read little segments and little parts. If they don't do anything in terms of bringing them back, it's going to show that the NCAA is not cooperative with individuals with disabilities. Worse, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, as we've seen, and you gave some good examples there, gambling is an illness. People handle it differently, just like, not everybody who drinks alcohol will become an alcoholic, but we know that there's a possibility that some people will, and gambling is really no different. I mean, it doesn't seem like it on the surface, but it's certainly, and we could come up with many cases where we can show that people have suffered, whether it's sports, casinos, whatever. I've heard horror stories about people becoming addicted to gambling, so it's no different. All right. I'm sure that as this, like I said, as we lead up to June, this Brendan Sorsby thing is going to continue to be a hot topic. And of course, the various things going on with the NCAA right now with being sued. I'm sure that that'll come up again. Hopefully we won't have any more gambling, as we don't want to see that, within the sport. But as I said, gambling is legal. So how are we going to police it? And, we really need to look at these partnerships that exist. So until next time, Ken, remember to follow us, like us, and subscribe. And we'll see you next time on Chasing Rings Overtime. See ya.
Take care, everybody.